In the beginning, our Creator created us with the promise that if we are loyal and live good lives, we would have eternal life. However, some men wanted eternal life here on earth, and when they attained it, that eternal life turned into an eternal damnation here on earth. Today we're going to review the movie Sinners, a movie directed by Ryan Coogler and starring Michael B Jordon and Hailey Stienfield. Please like, share, and subscribe. Here's the story. Here you see a man running towards a cabin, frantically trying to get away from something and appearing to have smoke coming off of his body. Some people move to the wilderness to get away from outsiders and the outside world. These two races should have listened to the Indians later, as they were telling them the truth. The man at the door looks innocent. Sometimes the most innocent knock at your door can be your last. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, and let's tell the story from the beginning. Here it goes. In the beginning, you're introduced to a boy named Sammy who arrives in a blood-stained shirt and a church. He's also carrying his trusted guitar, but as soon as his father Jedediah sees him, he begins to pray to God for his son's sins, which he believes he's been out committing some. As the loving father embraces his son in praise, we're switched to the day before, and you see Sammy in a field and realize this is where he and his family live. You then see Sammy standing off in the distance, just glazing up in the air, wishing for a better life. Next, you see two twin brothers, Smoke and Stack, arriving from Chicago in Clarksdale, Mississippi, after a long drive. You see, they made a lot of money with the mob in Chicago, returning back to Mississippi, meeting up with Hogwood, a local landowner, trying to buy some land to open up a local juke joint. You see, this is 1932 in Mississippi. Racial tensions are high, and they tell him that if the Klan attempts to harm anyone, they will spare no expense defending themselves. Next, Smoke and Stack drive over to their Uncle Jedediah's house and ask if Sammy can play his guitar. However, Jedediah disagrees, but Sammy insists on going, stating he'll be back for sure the next morning. He then asks Smoke and Stack about living in Chicago as they drive. Smoke and Stack reply by saying that the buildings are just taller, but they're both the same. This upset Sammy, as he had high hopes of going to Chicago to start a better life. The two then abruptly pull over and retrieve some Irish wine and beer that they had stashed before meeting Sammy. This shows that the brothers have already sinned by stealing. However, Smoke wants to go ahead and take it to the juke joint for its opening night. However, Stack disagrees, but then they come to a general consensus and decide that that's where it's gonna go on the first night, the opening night of the juke joint. Later, as Smoke goes to get some necessities, Stack and Sammy are trying to get people to come to the juke joint. Then Stack takes Sammy out for a ride, and Sammy plays a nice melody tune for him as they drive. Sammy eventually asks Stack about his past, but he says he doesn't want to talk about it because his father beat him when he was younger for no reason. One day, Stack said he saw his father passed out. The next morning, he saw Smoke burying his father and wondered why. Their journey then takes them to the local train station where they meet Delta Slim and recruit him for the party. Meanwhile, Sammy is intrigued by a married woman named Perlane and invites her to the party. Meanwhile, Stack finds himself confronted by a former lover named Mary. She's now married. However, Mary confesses that she still has feelings for Stack, but the way he left her emotionally distressed. Stack then tells her due to racism and the fact that they could both get killed just by talking that she should leave. She then says that her mother passed, and even though he acts like he doesn't care, you can tell it deeply affects him. Next, the three men ride out to see if they can get cornbread to watch the door. At first he disagrees, but then his wife convinces him to go and do it. Later, you see Stack going into town and making a deal with local grocers, Bo and Grace Chow. They ask them if they can provide a sign and food for the juke joint, and they agree. He then goes to see his estranged lover, Annie, and they discuss their deceased daughter. He then gives Annie a mojo bag back for good luck that she gave him years ago. And after performing some sort of a ritual for protection, Smoke asks Annie can she come and cook catfish at the new juke joint. She disagrees at first, but after Smoke tells her how he feels, she agrees to come. The two then share a tender moment. Just then it switches to a man named Remick, who seems to be burning and running towards a shack so that he can get some shade. As Remick bangs the door relentlessly, a married couple named Bert and Joan open the door cautiously. They seem to be very cautious, with a man stating he was chased by Indians all the way out here. And as the sun goes down, the man eventually bribes them with gold, eventually getting invited inside. As Bert hides Remick, his wife drives off some Indians approaching. But before leaving, the Indians warn her not to let a man in their home. He states he's dangerous. The film then pans back inside where Joan is looking for her husband, eventually finding Remick with blood on his mouth, Bert on the ground, and Remick with an evil smile. Joan then notices her husband Bert as he's turned into a vampire and looks and sounds like Remick as he eerily says, "Hey baby." Joan then yells out in horror as she soon suffers her husband's same fate, turning into a vampire as the night progresses. We pan back over to the juke joint where Smoke has opened it up for business. However, in the back room, as the brothers congregate, Smoke realizes that some of the patrons are paying with old slave pay, which he thinks is going to heavily eat into their profits, and disagrees. He also states that the money can only be used locally. You then see that the juke joint is open and you see Pearl arriving and makes Sammy smile, and they eventually start talking as the other patrons are enjoying themselves in the juke joint. But then Mary arrives, causing Stack to ask her to leave. However, Mary refuses and says that she's there with her family and is gonna stay. Next, you see Sammy playing for the crowd. He and Slim decide to entertain them. What they don't know is that the music, however beautiful, is attracting evil spirits as well. Even Lucifer loved the music. And Remick, Bert, and Joan show up to the party, asking to be let in. And as Cornbread listens to them, Smoke shows up, and Remick says they just want to come in and party, but Smoke refuses, saying they're in the wrong place. And at this moment, you realize that the vampire has to be invited in order to come into your home. Meanwhile, Sammy and Pearl are having a makeout session when Smoke comes to the door but decides not to intervene due to the physical nature of their encounter, fully understanding that they needed privacy, so he walks off. Smoke then goes back with his brother Stack and they discuss the financial stability of buying the sawmill, and Smoke states that he thinks that money won't be made. Stack eventually confides in Mary, who says she wants to go and speak with Bert, Remick, and Joan to see if they can give them the money. And after back and forth negotiations between Stack and Mary, at first Stack totally disagrees, but then agrees and gives Mary a gun, and she parades outside to try and confront the three visitors. And there's a sense of eeriness in the air. As she confronts Remick, he pulls out money from a time that was at least 13 to 1500 years earlier. Mary gets frightened as Remick shows himself and starts slobbering and tells them to leave as she turns around. You see Remick elevated. He eventually turns her, and then she comes back and asks unsuspecting Cornbread to allow her entry back in. Once back in, Mary is not who she was when she left, and she eventually confronts Stack, seduces him, and then bites him in the neck, killing him. Meanwhile, back outside, Smoke is just doing some rounds and goes to check on his brother, eventually opening the door and sees Mary hovered over him, biting him and blood all around. Smoke eventually fires several rounds at Mary, killing her, seemingly, but after a few seconds, she gets back up and stares at Smoke and states that her and her new friends are gonna kill everybody inside, and then takes off running outside. As Smoke tries to comfort his brother Stack, there seems to be some form of life left in him, but eventually he takes his last breath and passes away. And at the urging of Annie, his body is locked in the storeroom. Smoke then asks all the guests to leave, unbeknownst to them of the dangers lurking outside. Grace wants to go home, but her husband eventually goes out to start the car. On the other side, Slim takes over the door duties from Cornbread, who needs to take a leak. And as he's taking a leak, he hears whispering and giggling. What we realize is that the vampires have set a trap for Cornbread, and there's no way out for him as he tries to go back. As he reaches the juke joint, he confronts Slim and everyone else and asks to be let back in. However, Annie isn't having it and tells Smoke to be careful as Cornbread asks for his money. Smoke reaches, but Cornbread grabs him and tries to bite him. Just then, Smoke fires one shot, blowing half of his face off. But just then, they see Cornbread gets back up, tries to reach them before they slam the door. Back inside, they hear Stack banging on the door, demanding to be let out of the storeroom. Annie cautions Smoke not to, stating she checked his pulse and he was dead. Just then, he breaks out. Annie douses garlic on him as he runs out of the juke joint. As he runs by, it appears the garlic is burning him. At this point, Smoke and the patrons understand the threat. Ask Annie what to do. She asks to get wood, garlic, and silver. Annie then states that her family members passed this down, but she had actually never experienced it, but only heard it through stories, and one of those stories stated that if you can hold up until daylight, vampires can't come out, which would lead to their complete incineration during the daytime. And when you thought it couldn't get any worse, Remick has already turned everyone that was at the party into vampires, including Bo. Remick at the door confronts everyone and states he only wants Sammy because he can play music that can help him connect to his previous ancestors. He also tries to seduce everyone else by stating that he can give them something that the world has been keeping from them. Smoke then tells him that no one's gonna take Sammy and no one's gonna take anyone else inside. Bo then tells his wife why don't he pay a visit to their daughter, which causes Grace to go crazy. Smoke then tries to calm Annie and the others by telling them if they kill Remick, that everyone else would be okay, but Annie says that's not how it works. She heartbreakingly states that anyone who was turned has to be killed by sunlight or a stake through the heart. Remick and the others start singing outside to antagonize the ones inside, eventually causing Grace to go crazy, screaming out for them to come in and get them, eventually causing everyone to grab arms and prepare themselves. But eventually Grace, Perline, and Annie are all lost, and before Annie dies, she has Smoke to drive a stake through her, and with grief he does. Just then, Slim sacrifices himself so that Smoke and Sammy can leave, only for them to be confronted by Remick and Stack outside while he handles his brother. Remick tries to turn Sammy, and he fights back as best he can, but he's no match for the ages-old demon. Just then, he breaks his guitar over his head, and the silver actually cuts Remick, causing all the other vampires to scream in pain. You then understand that they all share a physical connection to Remick. Then the scene switches back to the fight between Smoke and Stack, and although Stack is a vampire, Smoke has military training that helps him, and eventually maneuvers his brother to where he has a stake pointed at his heart. Back outside, just as Remick is about to turn Sammy, Smoke stabs him in the back. As the sun starts to appear, Remick and all the other vampires begin to burn. Smoke and Sammy manage to survive until daylight. Smoke then tells Sammy to take the brother's truck and go back, while he gathers equipment from his truck. He also remembers that Remick said that Burke was the son of Hogwood, the racist Klans member that sold them the property in the first place, and he knows he's coming back. Smoke decides to confront the Klansmen in one final battle and pulls out his machine gun from back when he was in the war, and shortly thereafter, his hunch was correct. Hogwood returns with several Klansmen with weapons, and as the racist pigs try to go into the building, Smoke ambushes them from behind, removing the mojo bag that Annie had given him. After exterminating all of them, he is mortally wounded and sees Annie and his baby. Just then, you revert back to the beginning of this video when Sammy walks up to his father's church and the father prays for his son, knowing something evil has happened. The father tries to get him to renounce the blues, but Sammy decides to take off in Smoke and Stack's car. Many years later, it's revealed that Sammy has become a renowned blues singer, and following a performance 60 years later in Chicago, Sammy is visited by Stack and Mary. Stack then proceeds to tell him that Smoke let him live only with the promise that he would not harm Sammy. He said that he would honor his brother's promise. However, he senses that Sammy is gonna die soon from old age and promises that he could turn him into a vampire. But the old man refuses the offer. Stack also states that they've been following his music over the years. Stack also asks Sammy to play something from the 30s so that they can reminisce the music from back in the day. And once he's finished playing, Stack stands up and hugs his younger cousin. Before they leave, Sammy says, "Up until the sunset, it was the best day of his life." Stack agrees and says it was the last day he saw the sun and his brother. And he confesses that it was the last time that he felt totally free. And you've now seen the 2025 recap of the movie Sinners, a Ryan Coogler movie starring Michael B Jordon, Hailey Stienfield, Miles Cranton, Jack O'Connell, Wumi Mosaku, Jamie Lawson, Omar Benson Miller, Delroy Lindo, Lee Jun Lee, Yale, Lola Kerr, Peter Dremanis, Buddy Guy, Saul Williams, Adrian Ward Hammond, Tenai Jackson, David Maldonado, Eden Ekalardi, Helena Hu, Sam Malone, Jaquan Monroe Henderson, Percy Bell, and Emily Ellison.